Ever since I did the video series on how I got my green card through the EB2 National Interest Waiver Program, there has been a slew of questions, people sending me emails, DMs, all kinds of questions. But one question that has come but has been infrequent has been, how about the EB1 program, right? So the EB2 is the employment-based category 2, EB1 is employment-based category 1. It's usually reserved for people with Oscars and Nobel Prizes and people with extraordinary ability, right? So there is that category, and people have asked me, what about that? Well, today I'm going to be interviewing a PhD who actually went through that EB1 process, and you'll see that most of what we talk about in this episode is not necessarily all the technical details that go into applying for an EB1, although we talk about that. But we talk a lot about the mindset that you need to have, okay? And I thought that was really, really important, because a lot of people have reached out to me ever since I posted those videos, reached out to me, and most of the time I sense a lot of fear, I sense a lot of apprehension, I sense a lot of hesitation for whatever reason, right? And today we talk about that in this episode. And so I'll be chatting with Dr. Aditi Paul, who has a PhD in communications, and how she actually went through that EB1 process and came out of it successfully. Let's watch the video. You're welcome, Dr. Paul. Tell us maybe a little bit about your educational background, how you came to be an international scholar in the United States, and then maybe a little bit through that EB1 journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gertrude. Should I call you Gertrude or should I call you Dr. Nontera?
It's Gertrude is fine.
If I'm calling you Gertrude, you have to call me Aditi.
Yes.
But yeah, I did say this to you offline, but for your viewers and your listeners, I will say this again, how excited I am to be on your channel and how thankful I am to have found you through my network on LinkedIn, to see somebody of your caliber not do what the status quo was doing and carving out your own path with so much boldness and kindness is such a great example to follow, especially as a person of color, as we go by in the United States, to see a person like you, and I see a lot of myself in you, that you knew your worth and you're getting it out there and you're being bold with your steps. So thank you for having me on your podcast and your YouTube channel. Now a little bit about me. Like Gertrude said, my name is Aditi. I have a PhD in communication studies, and I got a bachelor's and master's in computer science, and I came to the US in 2010. It's been a long time. I do want to preface it by saying that I am not an ambitious person at all. The reason I got a PhD, the reason I got an EB1 had nothing to do with meritocracy and everything to do with survival and ease, because that's what I believe in living in. So when I got my PhD, and the reason I came to the United States, not because I was dying to come to the US, I was very happy with my life in India, to be honest with you, and I had a lot of friends. But then I was in my last year of a master's in computer science, and I really did not like my master's in computer science. Neither did I like my bachelor's. And it just happened at that time when I was so clueless with my life. My sister got pregnant in the United States, and she called me over and we wanted to meet our firstborn nephew. And when I was in the United States, she told me, hey, why don't you just take up the time to connect with different professors in different universities and talk it out with them and see, I know that you're interested in communication, so why not just talk to them and see if you can get a PhD? No harm, no foul, right? And I'm like, listen, I am not doing anything better back home. Might as well. So I had a conversation with some professors in University of Michigan and Wayne State University, because my sister was in Michigan. And I got a very positive feedback from them. They said that, yes, even if you are a bachelor's and master's in computer science, you can absolutely get a PhD in communication. So that's what I did, because I didn't want to work a 9 to 5 back home in India. And just so I could continue being a student, I signed up for a PhD. And another reason my sister told me to sign up for a PhD is because my father, no way in hell is an Indian man going to support his daughter on her vagaries of getting a PhD in communication when she's switching her career from computer science. Like, that is absolutely sacrilegious. So I knew I had to carve out my own funding. So that's my story about getting a PhD. If you were signing up to hear an inspiring story how I always wanted a PhD, you're not going to get that from me. I'm sorry. And the same thing happened with my green card as well. And we're going to get through that. It's not that I wanted to qualify for an EB1, nor did I ever have a life goal of being a permanent resident of the US. But I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired with the immigration system. Like, Gertrude, I know if you were an international, you started your journey as an international student as well. We know how unnerving it felt to feel uncertain every step of the way, right? Like, you
That's
get a
right.
good GRE score, that's not enough. What if your F1 does not get approved? Then your F1 gets approved. Now, what if your OPT doesn't come through on time? And that comes through on time. Then you get an H1B. Oh, but now you have to renew it every 6 years. And then you apply for
Yeah.
your green card. It just keeps going on and on and on and on and on and on. And I was like, when does this end? And
Yeah.
frankly, it was not going to end. It was not going to end for an Indian national like me if I didn't get my green card through the EB1 process. And that's why I
Yes.
went for the EB1 process.
Thank you for sharing that, because I feel like that's the story that so many international students go through. I remember when I was interviewing Pavitra Kumar, who was another guest on the show, and she was saying, I got tired of signing the I's, right? All the I papers. Like, I got tired of that. And so for her, she even felt going back home was the better option for her. And she ended up going back to India. But because there's so many hurdles that they make you jump, and sometimes some of it is, to be honest, if you look at it critically, unnecessary, especially since a lot of international students are contributing to the economy, are especially, when you've gotten into graduate level education, are paying taxes, are doing so much research that contributes to the society. So yeah, I totally get it. So let's talk about the EB1 process, right?
Mm.
How did you get started with it? And for somebody and we'll come to some mindset questions very soon, but for somebody that wants to get started with it, what would you tell them?
Yeah. I would tell them to get a sister who is type A, because that's the only reason why I got started. My sister was on my case to figure out how to get a green card because, like I said, I was, after getting an H1B, and that too, when I got my H1B, because I worked in academia, I got my H1B without having to contest anything. It was not through the lottery process, so I just got it when I got the job. And I was coasting, Gertrude. I was honestly coasting. But my sister kept telling me, did you apply for your green card? Did you get the process started? And to be honest with you, that repetitive insisting of my sister got me thinking that, okay, let me figure this out. Let me ask, because I knew that I was not going to get my green card through EB2 if I kept waiting in that line. I hope your audience knows EB1, EB2. They know it. But if you don't know the predicaments of the EB2 process, especially for an Indian national, you're waiting for, humbly speaking, 20 plus years, if that. It could be up to 90 years sometimes. So I knew that was not going to happen. But to be honest with you,
And let me
yeah,
pause there, because the reason that is for India, and I know this is for India
yeah,
and Chinese nationals, the
mm-hmm,
reason it's so long is because of the population size. By the way, like
yes,
there's that factor. There's a population size, and the fact that sometimes I don't know, the US wants to prioritize people that have fewer people coming in as immigrants
exactly,
sometimes. So
exactly.
there is that I think they're trying to strike a balance, but it ends up not being a balance. Anyways,
Yes,
please go
it's
ahead.
yeah. So there is a persnickety 7% rule. So if 100 people are applying from a country, then 7% of that 100 people are going to get the green card, and then everybody else is like put in the backlog. Now 7% of Bosnia versus 7% of India, there's a bit of a difference. So I knew that that's not going to happen. And what I wanted to say before is there was another reason why I was not looking at an EB1. And at that time, I thought I was just lazy. Honestly speaking, I was not lazy. I was very, very scared. My sense of not being enough had flared up so much that I just suffered from a paralysis of analysis, because I knew that my friends who got their EB1 green card through that process were stellar human beings. Like, they had hundreds and hundreds of hundreds and hundreds of citations. They had high impact publications. They had patents, they had this and that. And here I was getting rejected by reviewer 2 on the daily. And I'm like, I cannot so much as publish a paper. How am I ever going to get my green card through this process? And understand, I had a PhD. So the feeling of not being good enough, as instilled by the immigration system, never stops. Never stops. I just spoke with somebody from Amazon. This gentleman makes $350,000, Gertrude. And he had this list of things he had done. And his question was, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Like, the system is going to make you question your worth every single step of the way. And that's a very, very difficult place to be. So that's where I started my journey, being very scared. But little by little, I took steps to get over that fear. So the first thing that I did was have a ton of conversations with everybody who I knew, who knew somebody who got their green card through their EB1. And I sought help, humbled myself, and I sought help from everybody who was providing help to me.
That the sought help from everybody that was providing help to you. Thank you so much. You mentioned something earlier on about people who were going into the EB1 process had hundreds of citations on their papers, and for you were getting rejected with your papers. Well, and I've had people say this to me, even for the EB2 process, that, I can't do that. That's for like the really smart people. So what do you have to say to that? For somebody that's, haven't been through it and been successful with it now, what do you have to say to people that kind of push against that idea that, oh no, I have to be like this brilliant genius in order to apply for this visa type?
I felt like that as well. I honestly felt like that because this is the category. Also, the name of these categories are so elitist, like outstanding researcher, aliens of extraordinary ability. And one of the criteria is having an Oscar, because yes, everybody just has an Oscar lying in their closet. Like, what do you mean, right? So if you feel like that, don't be hard on yourself. The system is designed to make us feel like that. And I didn't realize this, until one of my friends who's Dutch, who's also trying to come to the US, he said that, Aditi, I think they want to scare us so that less of us try. They want to scare us because less of us try. So like when you check yourself out, like when you look at this category and I'm like, this is it, I'm not even gonna try. That's half the battle lost. That's
That's
so
right.
that's the first thing. So when I tell my friends and when I think about my journey, I was like, I really needed to convince 3 people to get my green card. The first one was the USCIS adjudicator who was looking at my portfolio. The second was my lawyer, and the third was myself. And the most difficult person to convince was myself, that I am good enough to get this, because to get over that psychological hump takes a lot of work.
It does. It does. It takes a lot of work, but one of the ways that I've learned to beat fear is just simply to take action,
That's
right?
right.
It's simply to take action. Multiple people have written to me, "Oh, can you help?" And I'm like, something. At a point, I had to tell people, I'm not an immigration lawyer, and I cannot advise you on your case because every
Mm,
case is different. But behind that request, I usually saw fear. I usually
mm.
saw somebody trying to ask me, can you assure me that this is going to
That's
work?
right.
Can you assure me that if I try, I won't waste my money? And I'm like, go ahead. I'm not, you may be seeing me as a super impressive person, and you may be seeing Aditi as a super impressive person. But the reality is that probably some of you have more work than us. Right, you probably have a lot more publications. You're probably working on something even more amazing. You're probably doing something brilliant. But like Aditi said, it's easy to feel intimidated when you see, exactly, aliens of extraordinary ability, and you're looking at the B's that you got in college and thinking, I'm not extraordinary, I got some B's. Well, newsflash, I have a C on my college.
Right.
People always make fun of me. They're like, oh, G got one C and she's always complaining. But the point we're trying to make here is that you probably are overqualified for this, and
Hmm.
it's important for you to like overcome that fear and go for it.
Yeah.
You were going to say something before I interrupted you.
No, that's exactly right. That the only antidote to fear is action. Take the smallest step. Take the smallest step, and look at yourself objectively, because that's something that I also had to come to terms with myself, because I was comparing myself, fortunately or unfortunately, most of my friends, because I am from the Indian community, they're all in computer science. They're all in the physical sciences. They're all doctors. And here I am talking about hookup culture in college campuses, and I'm like, this is great. Like, I'm talking about online dating. That's my research area, right? And they have all of these glorious things. The citation count is ridiculous, and the impact factor of their journals are at a 30, and I just published at a journal whose impact factor is in the decimal points. Like, but the thing is, that's my field, right? I was comparing apples to oranges when I had to compare apples to apples. Now the tricky part for me was I didn't have another social science person to reach out to. I had one friend, and she's Ghanaian, and she too is a professor at a university. But her experience from me was very different, because she had a very supportive lawyer. Now, I was working with a lawyer from New York City, and New York City lawyers, that too immigration lawyers, are a category in and of themselves. So her lawyer said, you give me what you have, I'll work with your case. And my lawyer was of the disposition, show me how good you are, because currently you're not, this ain't it, right? So when you are facing those challenges, when you have this internal voice that says, am I good enough? I don't think I'm good enough. And then an external voice is echoing that takes a toll on you. So yes, make progress. Yes, take steps, but also realize sometimes when you're just incapacitated and sitting at the corner and drinking a drink that you should not be drinking, it's for a reason. So be radically kind to yourself and be fearless. Both can go at the same time.
Yeah, be fearless. I think that that's the key there. Be fearless. You know, be fearless. That's all I'm going to say. And it's likely, and I think the other fear is, apart from what you just said, right? With the fear of even starting, right? People
Mm-hmm.
are afraid, am I going to waste my money? Am
Mm,
I going to waste my time pursuing this? Should I figure something else out? And I always say, well, that's up to you. There are people that have made the decision to, go back home, and then they're thriving and they're doing well, and they find that that's a better fit for them. But if, maybe you even want to work in the United States for a while before you go back home, I think that going through, an employment based visa is such a great way for you to stop having to sign all these papers, for you to finally feel like you're not an imposter being here. I'm telling you, it took me, until it took me getting my green card to finally feel like I was no longer to feel like I was no longer unstable. Because the whole time I've been in the US from 2003 up until 2018 when I finally received my green card, I felt like at any point in time, I wouldn't have done anything wrong. There was nothing going on, but at any point in time, I felt, well, maybe today is the day that somebody writes me a letter to tell me to go home, and that feeling, it's not that you don't want to go home. It's just like sometimes you haven't finished what you want to do. Sometimes you have certain goals you haven't met yet. That feeling, I don't wish it on anybody. That feeling of instability, of the fact that this is not my home, or anything could happen. What if I've known people that have lost their funding. International students have lost their PhD funding and immediately have gotten into being out of status because they've lost the funding.
That's right.
And for me, that was like, hearing that story from somebody was so devastating for me, because I'm like, wow, like that's no fault of yours that you lost funding, that your PI lost funding whilst you were doing your PhD, but now you're going to have to pay for it. But if you have this path, both EB1 and EB2, which can even help you as a PhD student, not just as somebody who's completed your PhD. If you're a PhD student who has some work under your belt, who has some publications out, who has some citations out. When I finished applying, I realized, wait a minute, I could have done this a long time ago, because by the time I did this, I wasn't a postdoc.
There are so many reasons why we are pushed to this race of getting a green card, not because we are dying to be American citizens, absolutely not, but just to be done with this hellhole that is immigration. And when I think about the needs that we look to fill in our lives, I always go back to the structure. I'm going to nerd out for like a hot second right now, but look up something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're familiar with that, are you familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Leave it up to a PhD to bring through theories when they're talking on a podcast.
Oh no, it's a good one. It's a good one, actually. Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. So in when you are an immigrant on a visa and you're going through this, the Maslow's hierarchy, according to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are still at the bottom of that pyramid. You're still at the bottom of that triangle, and you keep being at the bottom of that triangle until that green card comes through, if you choose to stay in this country. Right now, I have gotten a lot of, when I shared my green card journey, a lot of people, Indians, said that, and I understand where they're coming from. They said that, why don't you just come back to your country, right? Like, why do you have to like cater to the privilege, the whiteness of America? I understand where you're coming from, because there is a history of colonization, there has been brain drain, etc. But like you said, a green card is not just a status in a country. It is also a way for me to fulfill some of the goals that I had for myself, which I would not have been able to achieve if the rug was just pulled out of my feet, if my H-1B got rejected. Those are some of the nuances that only an immigrant can understand. And an immigrant from in the US can understand, because the US immigration system is very, very unique. We wouldn't have felt any of these tremors if you were in Canada. Canada is just giving out PRs, right? So why don't you just go to Canada? It's so easy to say this, right? But I encourage people who are passing these judgments to get to know somebody's story. Like, for example, I hosted 3 coffee chats for Green Card, and I had follow-up conversations with people through that coffee chat, and one of them said that their parents took her to the US when she was 6 years old or something, and she's been here, and her parents were on an H-1 visa, so they had to go back, and she's also on a visitor visa or something, and now she has spent 20 years of her life here, and she's known the entire system here, and now she has to switch back and go back to India because she doesn't have a green card. Like, are you kidding me right now with that, right? So there are so many different reasons people want to get a green card, not to be permanent residents of America, but to get out of immigration issues. Now, you had asked me a question, what do I do? How do I get started with my EB1? Yeah, let's just get back to that for a second. And I'll make it very, very simple, right? I did something, and I'm going to tell you what I did, and it's not the thumbprint of how you should do it. the first thing I did was I went to the very scary uscis.gov website and I looked up the criteria for EB1A and EB1B. That's what I did. And after I looked at that, I took a printout of that and I sat with my resume and I looked at what are some things that I have already done that can satisfy these criteria. That helped me identify my strengths and that helped me identify my gaps. Once I had identified that, then I spoke with other people. That was step number 2. Start informational interviews. Take the research approach, right? So start informational interviews, get to know where they're coming from, what they did, how they overcame, and then give yourself some time to work through your profile. The third step is talk to at least 2 immigration attorneys. Talk to at least 2 immigration attorneys after you have spend some time optimizing your profile. So those are the 3 steps that I did. Look up the criteria, take a printout of that and stick it in front of your face. Take an inventory of what you did, talk to other people, optimize your profile, and then check with an immigration lawyer. And when you do that, you do have to pay money out of your own pocket. Don't be penny wise and pound poor. If $125 worth of a lawyer's time gives you a fair assessment of where you are, that can cut down your immigration wait time by 20 years, wasn't that a good enough investment?
It was. It is. It is a good enough investment. Yeah, you're totally right. You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for giving that summary of how somebody could get started. For those of you that watch this channel, if you haven't, I have like a 4 or 5 video series where I talk about my own experiences. So for people that always want to know what my story is, I definitely refer you to those videos. I've shared everything in those videos. Beyond that, that's all legal help. And like Aditi said, seek legal help. You are not going to move forward. I know that there are a lot of people that try to do this by themselves. And yes, you can definitely try to figure it out by yourself. But I remember when I was going through this process, chatting with my friend, and I was like, sometimes you just have to pay somebody that knows what they're doing to help you to do what you need. I always have shared the lawyers I've used. They are at wegreens.com. You can go, they do most of their stuff, remotely. And so you can chat with them remotely and do everything with them remotely. It doesn't matter which part of the country you're in. So I recommend them because they handled my case very expertly and very professionally. But maybe you don't want to work with them. It's okay. Find an immigration lawyer that you can trust, that is recommended, and speak to them about the reality. And I love that you said that seek the advice of at least 2. And the reason I'm going to say this is exactly what I did in the beginning. When I started this process, I was my EB2. I was in graduate school at that time. I even went to labor. I went into labor. Wow. The week I emailed that particular law firm. This was around 2 years before I graduated from my PhD. And they told me, well, based on what you have right now, we don't think you'll qualify for this, right? A few years later, I reached out to another law firm, and they actually, before that, there was somebody in between, and they said the same things. They were like, oh, that's for really smart people. That's for really extraordinary people. I don't think, and they actually told me, I don't think you meet that criteria. A year later, I spoke with a set of lawyers, and they said, you have enough, so start the process and start it early. Maybe you speak to somebody and they tell you, okay, everything is not like you have good potential, but here's how you can improve. Go back and go and improve, and then come back and talk to them. But don't wait until everything is coming to an end before you are like, well, how do I figure this out? Because I know based on your story with your H1B and based on my story, because I was on OPT, I waited too long, and you don't have to wait that long. A lot of people have a lot of work that can get them through that door. And so don't sit on it, and don't be intimidated by the fact that this is, extraordinary ability. Right. No, you are an extraordinary human being for getting into a PhD program to begin with. That's right. So, yes. So any last words, Aditi? This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah. And like even, there are so many people who are applying for EB1 without a PhD. Like, our extraordinariness comes from the fact that we made it from our country to here as an international student. Like, think back to that. How many people did that? Was that easy? It was not. It was not easy. But you did it. You did it. So find those pockets of extraordinariness in yourself. Yes, there are these proofs of validations we need from the system, have tangible benefits, and we need that. But don't wait for those proof of approvals from these systems to feel that you're a worthy human being. We have to start from that place of worthiness, and then the outer manifestation is going to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Aditi, for this conversation. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
They will find me in your comment section. I am a big follower and fan of Gertrude on LinkedIn. She has such a wonderful presence. And if you want to find me through my profile handle is Dr. Aditi Paul on LinkedIn. And on Twitter, I am Aditi Paul. I'm also on Instagram, but my preferred vices in social media platforms are LinkedIn and Twitter. And I also have my website. If you'd like to shoot me a message, you can do that as well. It's draditipaul.com.
Thank you, Dr. Aditi Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gertrude. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.